Hey, Eric here with Two Sides of FI. Just checking in to set up this episode. This is part 2 in our How Not to Fire series. If you missed part 1, be sure to check that out first. The premise of these is Jason and I have gone into Reddit under the financial independence and fire subreddits and pulled a number of posts to act as case studies for how not to fire. In part 1, we talked about people who are on the fire path and something has gone wrong, something is amiss, they need to make some course corrections. In part 2, Jason and I are going to be discussing posts from people who reached their financial independence number, retired early, and have discovered it's not what they expected.
I think for me, Eric, the thing that's interesting about this is obviously I am 13 months now after leaving my career behind.
Yeah.
And so I'm more than a year out. I recently wrote a post of my own on my blog. The next phase is now about what I felt like I had learned in that year. And while I learned a lot and there was plenty of emotional churn, I am not looking back in any way and saying I made a mistake or I need to go get a job and get back into the grind because this is not what I intended to do. So I'm very happy that I feel that way. But we're going to look at some posts from people who absolutely do not feel that way. Starting with this first one. And this is titled, "Fire Didn't Work Out for Me. I'm voluntarily going back to work." Ouch. Yeah, right? This person had a great job, doing well. They bought cash flowing real estate, started a small company that earns passive income. Sounded pretty secure. A year ago, they quit this job that they describe as the best job a person could have. And the last year since then has been horrible. Lack of socialization, need to get out of the house. Even impulse urges such as drinking at home have taken their toll on me. This year-long experiment is over.
Wow.
So, wow.
You know, the concerns here and the reasons stated for going back to work were all things that you actually encountered in your first year of fire, right? And some of those were unexpected. So I think maybe this is a window into those things. If you maybe had some inkling that this may be a problem or you're concerned about that, it's real. And it could be enough of an impetus to send you back to work. You're not in that position, which is great. But what do you think separates you from, you as someone who's been fired for a year and this person who fired for a year? You guys had totally different trajectories. What do you think the difference is there?
Well, the first thing that I reacted to when I just read this, and it is pretty brief, and the good news story is that this person did respond to comments from other people who had written to this individual. So I have a little more window into their thinking process. I think it really, for me, came down to this thought of focusing hard on the preparation for financial independence, but not at all thinking about preparing yourself personally. And what did you aim to do, and what did you hope to achieve? Because the quick read of this is they were wholly unprepared for when they stop, what comes next. And for me, I thought a lot about it. And I don't mean to say I thought a lot about it like I have this highly architected plan of exactly what I'm going to do year 1, year 2, year 3, etc. But I thought a lot about why I wanted to retire early, some of the things I wanted to explore in early retirement, as much as I don't use that word terribly often to describe my own situation. And it seems that this person has not. They probably had a lot of their identity wrapped up in the workplace. That's an assumption when they talk about lack of socialization, right? They probably didn't have a lot of friends outside of work. They might even be pretty young. They didn't state their age. And so maybe they're in an area where they haven't built up a network of people and suddenly outside of work, they didn't have what they needed. But that's clearly not all of it, right? Because their response is go back to work.
Yeah,
the response is not.
I was just going to say,
I have the means to keep doing this, right? I mean, why don't let you react to that?
I mean, financial independence is just that. They've set up a system where they can be financially independent, but the part that they're missing is the work aspect. And I think there's plenty of people who reach financial independence and continue to work because that has its own level of fulfillment. And I think that's totally fine. So if they lopped off the RE part, they might have been equally happy and fulfilled and even more wealthy. So I don't know. I think not connecting the RE part to FI is one of those things that you and I have. This is Two Sides of FI for a very specific reason, and I think more and more people, consider the FIRE movement to be the FI movement, and
Yeah.
this person is part of that. Clearly, if they're financially independent, they just have recognized that retire part is not all that fulfilling for them. And I don't know, you haven't made that decision. But in some ways, I don't think you ever saw it as retirement. And so that's what I was going to say is the difference.
Yeah, I think everything you've said there is entirely valid. One of the things I would ask this individual, if they were telling me they were thinking of going back to work, I would say, well, is there something else you could do part-time, even whether it's self-directed or for somebody else, even volunteer work, where you would get that same fulfillment, the socialization, the things you miss? For me, I had a corporate career that was, well beyond 40 hours a week. And I didn't feel any desire to do that again, but I did feel a desire to do things with and for people that I enjoyed. So I am, pouring wine in a tasting room 1 day a week, a single shift, very flexible, can move it around as I need to, but I really like that. Does it make me a lot of money? Of course not. I'm pouring wine in a tasting room. But
this person
working for tips.
I mean, this person,
they didn't say anything like that.
No. And they said they literally left the best job a person could ever want. So
yes.
Working
from home.
There's a clue right there. If you're really happy and content, just because you reached a certain financial milestone, doesn't mean you have to give up that happiness and contentedness. And in fact, they traded that for something which was clearly not something they enjoyed. So,
that's right.
Self-reflection and evaluation here is probably required, but thankfully it seems like it worked out for that person.
Yeah. And they may find after going back to work that, remove that itch that has been digging at them, and they will reflect more on what they want out of retire early. And who knows, maybe it's a couple of years and they're right back at it again, but they thought through it more thoroughly, a little bit older, a little bit wiser. Who knows? It's
also, the lesson here is nothing is permanent.
Absolutely.
Very few decisions, I should say, are decisions that you can't walk back and take a different path. And, this is proof of that. So I think it's validation for everyone who says, oh, what happens when I jump off this cliff? It's like, well, actually there's a soft landing.
Enough.
Yeah.
These two people titled their posts, number one, early retiring made me depressed. And the second one, RE, retire early, and am now extremely depressed. Please help.
Eesh.
Well, first of all, wow. It's very, striking. I saw these and I immediately read them and started digging into the comments because I wanted to know what happened here. And, both of them, I believe, are more than a year out at this point. And, the first one started where they finished, which is, I guess this is a reminder to retire to something, not from something.
Uh-huh.
And the second person started with, not sure why I'm posting this, should probably be sharing with a therapist, but curious on everyone's take.
Ouch. Oof.
Right?
This is serious. This is not just
it's very serious. I'm definitely not making light of this. It raises a lot of concerns. Because they have similar aspects of, I had thoughts of these fun things I would do. I did some of those fun things, or I had a list, but I didn't do any of it. I find myself kind of hapless, not sure what to do, not sure if it's the loose, kind of framework or no timelines, no pressure on me to do this stuff. In fact, the second person says, I spend most of my days just sitting on the couch, literally doing nothing or scrolling my phone in the endless pit of social media.
Ouch. All right. Well,
so
that's not,
right?
That's not the kind of RE I had in mind.
No. So as someone who is pre-retire early, you're still working in your chosen profession in architecture and in your own business. What is your reaction to two people echoing this kind of sentiment?
I mean, I definitely see this with people who start their own businesses too. Like that was where I went when I saw this, because you're without the structure and framework of having a social group, someone telling you what to do, deadlines, clients, all those things. And you sort of float from that heavily structured environment into one which is completely self-directed. And you were there too, right? You went from a very rigorous travel schedule and managing lots of people and feeling needed. And that has a certain set of, daily routines and requests of you, and also fulfillment. You feel that. And
Yes.
so and I remember feeling this way when I first transitioned to starting my business, feeling like a little bit aimless. But, earning money was actually the goal for me when I started the business that helped direct and focus my energies. And so it is a concern for me that I might end up here too, that, right now I have a task list a mile long or things that I'm interested in that I want to pursue.
Yeah.
But what if I get into that space and find myself like one of these people, like not motivated? Well, I mean, because the money isn't required anymore. So I really feel for these people, but I wonder if there wasn't some circuit breaker to prevent that, which would have been like testing out a mini retirement. Like, okay,
Yes. Same conclusion.
Oh, okay. Yes. I mean,
here we are not disagreeing again. God, our viewers are so bored
boring
at this point. Right. But there was actually an interesting comment. I don't know if you remember it in the second post. And that was, I'm working on projects and they're fun for a few days, but because it's not a revenue generating project, I have trouble staying motivated to work on it.
What if it, I mean, I could see making it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. But really, like what, I'm not entirely sure what that means, because from what, just pointing the camera at myself, I have a lot of projects I was interested in, and you can check me on this because I definitely I shared a lot of these thoughts with you. I had a lot of projects I was interested in. Most of them had no prospect of ever making any money. Yes, I found myself being attracted to things, particularly external forces, right, asking me to do stuff for money just because I felt like, oh, someone's offering me money, I should take it.
Yeah.
But I definitely have never had a problem being motivated by things that have no prospect of making money. So, I mean, you're supposed to be financially independent, right? You don't need that money. But how do you react to that idea that they're having trouble being motivated by something unless it is going to make money?
I mean, I kind of get it.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Explain.
Well, because, without the need to make money, then it's a hobby. And, not everyone has hobbies. Some people actually actively do not like hobby. Like my wife is a good example. She's like, I don't have hobbies.
No hobbies.
I have things I do. And so I've tried to reframe that discussion as like, well, it could be a money-making venture. And I personally find a lot of fulfillment and interest in creating businesses or creating things that like look like businesses, like micro entrepreneurial adventures, like to me, that's interesting and fulfilling and maybe would serve as some of that motivation. I mean, of course, they don't need the money because they're financially independent, but, sometimes that can provide the motivation and the drive to do it. And like, I don't know how you view this project that you and I are doing together, but if it were to make money, would it make it more fulfilling or less fulfilling, or would it be unchanged?
That's a good question. I don't know if fulfilling is the right word. I think it's like, it's nice to have. If it makes any money, right now it's been pretty low cash outlay for either of us for, web hosting or software and things like that. So minimally covering that seems super cool. If it makes more than that, I don't know if fulfilling is the right word, but it's very gratifying to know that people's interest in something you're enjoying doing can translate to income of any kind, because it's like, oh, that's a bonus. Like that's exciting. But certainly if it were wildly successful, yeah, that'd be thrilling.
But I don't
know, is that more fulfilling?
I'll push back on that a little bit, because I think, money is, when money is exchanged, it's a proxy for the value that you're creating in the world. And I think,
yes, I understand,
that can be highly motivating. And I, in some ways, would treat it as a game. Like, it's interesting. Yeah. It's more interesting if it makes money. It's just like you don't like gambling, but when you go to the casino with your friend, he gives you some money because it's just more interesting that way. There's some stakes, right? And so I think, this may not be the motivation for everybody. And certainly it's not the primary driver for either of us in this. It is the need to give back and educate and share what you're learning. Like that's always been a primary motivator for me. But money is a signal that you are, creating value for other people in the world. And so I think removing that for some people may make it less interesting or valuable. And certainly these people haven't stuck with it. So there's a reason for that, right? It all just feels maybe pointless. And I would be worried about that. Yeah.
No, I think you're onto something there. And that individual even says that they are applying to jobs on LinkedIn, getting keen interest in them and then backing out. They just want the uplift, right? The motivational uplift from someone being interested in them. So clearly they haven't found a source of satisfaction, of motivation. And so I expect if they find that thing, well, that's going to help them along. So to me, my summary of the two of these is maybe they haven't thought so much about what they hoped to get out of retire early, right? Financial independence is a separate thing, but they have left their jobs. But what did they hope to gain from that?
Right.
You really have to think through that question, because to your point, achieving FI does not mean you have to stop your job. You could reduce your hours. You could do different work. You could do the very same work if you love it. But you need to have a why and be prepared to, sort of act accordingly to meet that why. I guess is what I would say.
I think the other red flag here, and I see it in in each of these, is that when you remove yourself from the workplace, you remove yourself from that community and people's natural daily rhythms. And your job just naturally takes up a big space in your daily life. And
it does. Without
that, and lacking something to fill it with, or a community of people who are in a similar situation, I think it could feel kind of empty. And it's definitely a concern that Laura and I have expressed. And we've been talking to you and Lori about it. Like, okay, how did you guys find community? Because socialization is a huge part of, the workplace and being connected to other people and contemporary life. And, I don't want to just crawl in a hole and disappear. I mean, one of the things to hit back on the trawler that we've been talking about, like where to live in Phi, and Laura and I were doing some heavy research over the weekend on like, okay, if we got a trawler, this is what it would look like. And we're looking at the space that we're in. And she's like, yeah, but even if you did an RV, you could get out of that space and just step onto land and go see other people.
Right.
With a boat, you're like,
true.
It's just water. You just step out of the boat. I mean, and so I do feel like socialization in both of these posts is huge, community.
This next post-fire post is actually a response to another post titled "Regret Having Fired." And the original poster was looking for feedback on people who had taken the plunge of leaving their job and later regretted it. And so this individual wrote that they left their job in their mid-40s, and parts of it were great. They were doing the fun things they expected to do, exercising, all of the things, many things, they're common to people who are looking to retire early. But two big negatives. One we talked about a little already, and that's missing doing fulfilling work. Of course, there's lots of ways to address that. And they did try to do that, doing volunteer work, part-time teaching at a community college. And they discovered that those things really weren't for them. That's fine. You have the freedom to do that in Phi. But the second negative is the one that struck me. And that is, I missed having a larger budget. Yeah. Running was great for a while, but I missed having the money to attend yoga or other exercise classes. Oof. I miss being able to do family vacations beyond camping, which is fun for 2 summers, but variety is the spice of life. In the end, after 2 years, I went back into a full-time job. So what is your maybe very obvious take-home from that second thing that caught me, Eric?
Too lean. They suck at math. No, too
lean.
Yeah, they didn't do the math right based on what they wanted. And I think you and I have been pretty serious about, well, you especially have been serious about dividing up the buckets. And like, if you need a bucket for doing yoga and vacations, you better make sure it's fully funded before you step into fire. So I think we all know it's possible to under budget, but here you see the consequence of that reality. And it's not really where I'd want to be.
No. And it's something that, you and I have talked about either on the show or in private conversation about concerns about that. Both of us set our number. I set mine much earlier than you, but we both set it and then later continued to increase it.
Yeah.
Because we had more information. We realized and thought about and talked with our significant others about things that were important to us. How many vacations do we want to take? How often do you think you're going to replace your car? Are there other people in your life that you may need to spend money on to help support? Whatever those things are. you have to think about them and you have to put them in your plan. This is not just about a formula, right? We even said this in our episode about setting the number. It's not just that formula. Well, 25x my expenses and I'm done. Well, are your current expenses in your saving mode the same as they're going to be post fire? Probably not for most people. Sometimes they go down, sometimes they go up, but you really need to be sure you at least understand what's important so it's fully funded to the point that you just made.
I mean, this sounds like they were real tight. If they couldn't make these, like what I consider to be simple budgetary moves happen, then there must have been no contingency. There must have been like zero slop built into the budget, which we haven't talked about a lot, but as someone who does design and construction all the time, we're always building contingencies into budgets. It's a 10% contingency until, we got 1 month left in the construction, and then we can start to, release some of those unknowns and some of those funds. But, if you don't build that into your budget, you can't account for some of these things that you may not know. Because as I read this, I think, okay, well, what if I didn't know that was going to be the thing that I wanted to do in retirement? Like for me, like what if I want to take sailing lessons or something, how do you plan for those contingencies? And there has to be some amount of slop in your budget to account for that. And sounds like for this person, it was a deal breaker. I'd never want it to be the thing that breaks the budget.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I mean, sitting here as the post-fire guy, my reaction to all of these post-fire stories is somewhat similar. And that is, you need to know why you're going to this place, why you're driving towards financial independence, and what you believe you want out of retiring early once you take that decision. And by retire early, I typically mean leaving your primary career, the one that got you to where you are, to do something different or to do less of that thing, whatever it is. What's your why? What do you aim to do? How do you want to spend your time? To the most recent story, if you still want to be taking yoga or having someone clean your house twice a month, you better have that in your budget, because if it's not, you're going to miss it. So there's a different decision behind, I am actively deciding that this thing is no longer important. I'm not going to fund it. And oops, I didn't fund it because I didn't realize it was important. Yeah. So thinking through this, measure twice, cut once.
Also, just try on the lifestyle. Like take it for
that's a great point.
Take it for a spin before you go full hog. There's actually pretty easy ways to do that, I think. And, but I just like the fact that we're talking about all the dimensions of, you're post-fi and I'm pre-fi, and, we each have different concerns and also, different realities and different lifestyles, but there's a huge range in there of things to consider and think about. And I think the more consideration and time and thought you put into it, the better prepared you're going to be. And I think you and I are both planners. And I think by and large, people who are in the fire movement are planners. And so some of these kind of surprise me a little bit, because I say, well, what kind of planning did you do before you pulled the trigger, kind of thing? It doesn't sound like it's not the kind of planning I would have done.
Yeah, I do have those questions, and you will see some of those raised by commenters in those Reddit posts. Some of these people are younger, so they may have just gotten really caught up in the excitement of achieving this goal and set it as such a challenge. And then when they got there, they weren't really prepared for it. I don't mean to cast them all under that same bucket. They're certainly not all young people. This is not a Gen Xer sitting here making fun of millennials. Not my intention at all. Irrespective of your age. And your tenure in your job or whatever, right? All these things still apply, and I think, Eric, you summarized it really well there. There's a lot to think about pre-fire and post-fire, and none of us are perfect. We're all human beings. We cannot make perfect plans, but thinking through some of the topics that have been raised here, the examples of others who've come, before and have written about this path is incredibly informative for me. I have not stopped reading these posts. Yes, I focus much more on post-fire now. I like to see when I find one of those 3 years or even 5 years post early retirement, because you could just learn so much from anybody else's experiences. They're always going to be different than yours, but they're still going to be informative.
Yeah, and you have a great year out post, so I think we'll link that up in the show notes and continue to follow your story. And yeah, it's I mean, you've kind of got me interested in Reddit a little bit because there's a lot here, but
Woo.
man, it's a big, that's a big hole to fall into, especially
you heard that here, folks.
Man.
And let me just add to that. And that might mean at some point, I'm not going to promise it, his time is not as free as mine. You might even see Eric pop into the Two Sides of Fi subreddit, which
is there
I
one?
did end up creating.
Oh my God.
After a couple of people asked me to do it. Now this is not putting pressure on Eric.
Okay.
But we did start a community there. It was asked for to follow on our journey. So if you find that useful, in addition to, the show website where we post the show notes, feel free to check it out and let us know your reactions to this episode. We'd love to continue the conversation.
For sure.
In some parts of the world where you have handlers, they would always put you in like Western hotels. I'm like, I don't want to stay at the like, Hyatt.
No, I don't want to do that.
Like, yes, I appreciate you putting something where I'm not going to get ill, but
Right.
I'm not going to go have like the full English breakfast in Hyderabad. Like, I want the freaking dosas for breakfast. Right.
I want a grenade in my lunch.
The better Western hotels. Did you say grenade in your lunch?
Yes.